What's up guys, how you doing? It's so cold and dark today in London. Check this out, it was raining so much earlier on. So it's like 1 o'clock and I've just managed to get out now. And it's so grey that I can see on my screen that it's like perfectly, almost perfectly exposed to my skin tone. I don't even have any defilter on this thing at the moment. That's how dark it is in London today. I don't even need an ND filter and it's like 1 or 2 o'clock. It's like perfect time of the day. I was going to talk to you actually today about APS-C versus full frame and why I don't like APS-C anymore. I mean, I used to. Yeah, I used to have an A6400 and I used to love that camera actually. It was really good. Yeah, it was really good for an APS-C. You know, I used to really like the footage that come off it. It was pretty decent. Although before that I had a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera and that was, I feel like the footage that come off that was probably a little bit better. And that was Micro Four Thirds. But anyway, APS-C versus full frame. First of all, what is full frame versus APS-C? So full frame means a standard 35mm, and that's kind of like, you know, what would have been the roll in the back, but now it's obviously behind the lens where the sensor is. So that's full frame. And then an APS-C is basically a much smaller sensor. It's got a 1.5 crop. I'll put a little diagram to what they kind of look like. And it basically originated with a lot of camera companies coming together and decided to kind of, you know, create this smaller frame size. And then there is a lot of camera companies that do APS-C lenses and cameras, and they normally can be like cheaper, especially like with Sony you get the full frame ones which are like A7, and then the APS-C is like FX30 or A64, and yeah, they normally are like a cheaper range and the lenses are a lot cheaper as well. You're probably wondering, does the crop kind of make things worse or better quality? And this is kind of like, I've seen a few studies online where people are comparing the images, and a lot of the time the full frame does look a lot sharper, has like a bit more dynamic range. Obviously because the sensor is smaller, it's allowing less light in, and light is pretty much, everything is to do with light, always. The more light that is hitting the sensor, not the more light that's hitting the sensor, the better necessarily, because, you know, otherwise it can be blown out if too much light is hitting the sensor. But the bigger the sensor, the more chance there is of capturing more light. So a bigger sensor normally does result in better image. Yeah, nowadays we're like advancements of camera technology, you know, and you know, you do get amazing APS-C cameras, like for instance the FX30, which looks just, you know, it looks absolutely amazing. I've seen some of the footage that's come off that, especially if you've got great lenses on there. You can't really say that it's not good quality. If you was, especially nowadays with a lot of things just being watched on, you know, small mobile phones, like, and this, you know, most things are compressed down to 1080 anyway, Instagram and TikTok, then you couldn't even really tell that it was shot on something like an FX30. It just still looks absolutely incredible. So if it's down to quality, then, you know, you could argue that APS-C is just as good. If you wanted to look at things like camera size and compactability, then you could say that like APS-C definitely comes as a plus with that, because the lenses are a lot more smaller, the cameras are a lot more smaller, everything's just way more compact. So it can be super handy if you're traveling and just need a smaller setup, you know. APS-C definitely can be used better for that as well. And of course there's also price. APS-C is a lot cheaper for the same kind of focal length. But I would be careful with that, because the same focal length is a bit of a weird one. Let me explain a bit about that. I was going to sit down somewhere and explain the next part of this video, but it's pouring with rain and everything's wet. I'm just going to carry on walking. So an APS-C lens has the same focal length kind of numbers written on it as a full frame. So for instance, if you was to buy an APS-C 18mm, it will say on it 18mm, and even though it has the crop in the back of the lens, it's still an 18mm of full frame. So you can't really say it's a proper 18mm. If you wanted to buy the equivalent of, say now I'm shooting on a 16mm, so this is nice and wide, right? You can see everything, it's great. If I wanted to buy a 16mm APS-C lens and I actually bought a 16mm, it's not actually 16mm, it's 24. To buy the same focal length, you have to go down, take away the 1.6 or divide it. So actually a 16mm on an APS-C lens is actually a 10mm, kinda. It's a bit more, it's like 10.6 or something. If you look up on APS-C and crop, some people say it's like 1.5, but on some places I've seen it say 1.6, so it's not always as kind of clear. So yeah, that can be really confusing. And I know this because I actually kind of found out the hard way. Well, it's not like the hard way, nothing bad happened, but I bought an 18mm to 105. I'll show you the lens I bought down below. So yeah, this 18 to 105 was actually a 27 to a 157, something like this. So it wasn't actually an 18mm, and I was wondering why I couldn't get like as wide on this lens as I could with that kind of full frame, even though this is a 16, that's an 18. So I was like, all right, I'm holding on to this lens because I need a nice like wide lens. That was before I got this full frame, and I was using that lens on this camera because it was full frame, and this camera has an APS-C mode, which right now, let me give you an example of how that looks. So right now I'm filming on a 16mm. Let me clock it into APS-C mode. So this is on APS-C mode now, so this is 16, but it's obviously kind of transferred into a 24. So look at the cropping, right? It's quite a lot. That looks like way too close to my face now. But that's the difference, basically. It's a cropping like this. I'm gonna put it back to full frame because this is way too close to my face. So yeah, just be wary of that when shopping around for APS-C lenses. Make sure that you do the math and have the correct kind of equivalent to, you know, what you're kind of looking for. So if you want a really wide lens like this, I'd probably go for something like the Sony 10 to 20mm APS-C. I know there's like, last year I think it was, Sony just released a whole range of APS-C lenses. I think with the launch of the FX30, they, or might have been the year before, they kind of, you know, brought out a bunch of kind of great lenses to go with that to make sure they had a nice range on there. So that's the kind of lens you'd be really looking for if you wanted something as wide as this. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of great APS-C cameras these days. And if you, you know, didn't have the budget for a full frame, then I would definitely just kind of go with a, you know, like an FX30, or I think you can pick up for about 1,600 now. And then the lenses aren't as expensive either, as I was saying. You know, whereas, you know, if you're going to go for like something like the G Master lenses, obviously they're kind of like top of the range, but you know, you're looking at £1,000 plus. So definitely going for the APS-C range definitely can kind of take some, you know, a hefty load off that budget. So I can totally understand why people would kind of prefer to go for that. Me personally, I kind of wouldn't. I feel like I'm not necessarily always shooting in dark places, but I feel like I love to be able to go into a dark place, and on the full frame, I feel like low light capabilities are just so amazing. Like here on the A7 IV, the low light capabilities are just absolutely unreal, and I've shown some really, really dark places, shooting a lot of DJs and stuff, that I know that the APS-C lens would have really struggled with. As I mentioned, I did used to have the A6400, so I know that it did used to really, really struggle with those low light capabilities. But obviously you can't compare like the A6400 with the A7 IV because, you know, they're completely different kind of range. And the A7 IV just obviously has a much better kind of sensor in it anyway. But having said that, that's not kind of true, because definitely one good thing about APS-Cs, as I mentioned, they're cheaper and a lot lighter. And traveling is obviously something I'm really into. So doing something like, if I was to go traveling again and I didn't want to take such a big heavy setup with me, like right now I'm walking around with the, you know, A7 IV, and it's obviously quite a bulky camera, and the lens is obviously a bulkier. Walking around with an APS-C setup with, you know, a smaller lens, a smaller body, definitely would attract less attention. And also, you know, if it did get stolen, you know, the most you have in the setup maybe is, you know, maximum a couple of grand. So it wouldn't be as bad. And also packing it all up, you're in your bag, it doesn't take up as much space. So there's definitely reasons to go for an APS-C, especially if, you know, price and weight is a really big thing to you. So, you know, that's just definitely something to consider. And definitely something I would consider in the future. So I can never really, like, never say never, right? Because you just don't know what you might need in the future. And as I mentioned, as sensors are kind of getting a lot better and camera tech is getting just so much better, these, you can't really tell a difference that much anymore unless you're really going to shoot like a feature-length film, and you know, that stuff really does make a difference to you. But look at something like Blackmagic's, and that a lot of them don't have full frame, you know, sensors, and the camera quality is just absolutely amazing. As I mentioned in the beginning, my first camera was a Blackmagic. My first camera was a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, and that the image quality that came off of that was what I think better than some of the full frames I've seen. So it's not as easy to just say that it's just about the size of the sensor. But if you do have the budget to go full frame, I just definitely would. Just having those low light capabilities for me is just quite important. And the full frame lens that you get, you know, when it says it's a 24mm, you know you're getting that full 24, unless obviously you've got something like IBS, unless you've got IBIS on, which is going to give you a little bit of crop on the lens as well. But anyway, that's all I kind of wanted to say on the topic, to be honest. I don't think there's really a wrong or right answer about this stuff, because as I mentioned, it just really depends on budget. And you know, obviously everyone would always want the best quality cameras they can get if they had the budget for it. Like, I would probably have, you know, an FX3 right now. I don't know, actually, I kind of like my SM4. A lot of the time we are kind of ruled by our budget, and if you have no choice, you have to go for an APS-C setup, then there's nothing wrong with that, you know. So much about it is not about the gear anyway, it's about what you do with it. So, so yeah, grab an APS-C camera if you've got the opportunity. Anyway guys, I'm gonna wrap it up. So thanks a lot, please subscribe, please like, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks a lot.